plastic bottle in the ocean. Currents can carry it for miles until it vanishes into a massive swirling zone of trash. You see, in the 1980s, scientists started finding tiny plastic pieces floating in the ocean, and they predicted that the plastic would get trapped in this spot where ocean currents met. 10 years later, a sailor passed through that area and was surrounded by miles of trash. By 2015, scientists launched a massive expedition to measure it. They found over 1 trillion pieces, more than twice the size of Texas, and it's still growing every day. The popcorn is poured into the chamber, and the lid is screwed tightly shut. Next, a small stove is lit, and the chamber is balanced over the flame. A handle on the end rotates the chamber, and this heats the metal evenly, causing the kernels to pop, and the air inside expands, creating intense pressure. When the lid is opened, the pressure inside suddenly explodes, shooting the popcorn into the bag. If a frog grew to the size of a car, it could definitely swallow you whole. But frogs eat by opening their mouths wide and sucking in their prey. Now, even if it managed to swallow you, it can't digest something that big. It would eject its entire stomach through its mouth, flipping it completely inside out, forcing you up its throat. Then the frog swallows the stomach back down, putting it back in place. The dogs were strapped with explosives and starved, and treats were placed underneath the tanks. The hungry dogs learned to run underneath them in search of food. Then the explosives were fitted with a trigger stick, and in battle, the dogs would run under enemy tanks, thinking they'd find something to eat. The stick would hit the vehicle's side, setting off the bomb and killing the enemy. But when they tried this in the field, the dogs actually ignored the enemy tanks. Instead, they ran toward their own tanks, since they had been trained on those. Sadly, the soldiers shot them before their own tanks would explode. There was a staircase in the middle of the village that led straight into the sky, with no end in sight. Twice a year, they held Ascension Day, where they chose a name out of a barrel. It was a great honor to be chosen. The villagers would beam with pride. His sister fixed his hair and gave him a tearful hug. She would see him again when she was chosen. The elder pressed on his chest and studied him for a moment. Then he stepped aside without a word. He climbed as the villagers cheered. But as she watched the cloud swallow him, something felt terribly wrong. Later that night, she snuck through the village and got to the base of the stairs. Climbing them without being chosen meant your name could never be called. If she did this, she might never see her brother again. But she couldn't shake the unease, so she started climbing. As the village disappeared below, the air got thinner and it was cold. She found a door. It opened with a groan. Inside was a long table with 2 strange figures at either end. One of the figures reached out and lifted the lid from the largest tray. She froze in disbelief. It was her brother, tied like a roast, an apple jammed in his mouth. His eyes were blinking. He was still alive. She turned to go get help, but the wind slammed the door shut. The sunlight bounces off the mirrors until the beam is directed into the town square, lighting up the small area. And this is because the town is surrounded by steep mountains, which cast it entirely in shadows for half of the year. The sun is too low in the sky to rise above these peaks, so every day people gather in that single bright spot, soaking up the only sunlight they'll get. Tiny stones came out of her eye while she was crying. Confused, her family rushed her to the hospital, where doctors watched as stones continued to fall out. Now, they tested these stones, but couldn't figure out where they were coming from. Analysis showed nothing unusual in her body, and to this day, nobody knows why the girl cries stones instead of tears. They shoved the sick cat into the canister and shot it through a tube toward the vet. But when it arrived, it ran away, traumatized. You see, these tubes worked by using giant fans to push the canister along at high speed. Some networks would send mail, while McDonald's actually used them to deliver burgers. And one engineer even built a system to carry people, but the air rushed into the compartments, which weren't properly sealed. This could destroy the contents and terrify passengers, and they were eventually discontinued. When a nuclear bomb is dropped, a piece of uranium sits at its core, slowly releasing particles. But when it gets close to the ground, sensors trigger an explosion around it, and this forces the particles to collide with the atoms inside, about 10 septillion of them. Now, atoms are held together by massive amounts of energy, and as the particles split them apart, that energy is released 10 septillion times. This causes a massive explosion above the ground to make sure it reaches as far as possible, and everything below it is instantly vaporized. Tap their foot to check for a response if your baby